Atamari, everybody. Welcome to our briefing this morning on our Pāneke Pōneke and Cycleway networks on behalf of Wellington City Council. I just want to say that we are being live streamed at the moment, and that I also want to acknowledge the really good, robust conversations that have gone on informally and behind the scenes between councillors, and acknowledge that, you know, some people have been out there collecting their own surveys and doing their own information as well. But I think the big thing today is that we're going to hear from our kaimahi, our staff, on the work that they have done as a result of our resolutions as council. And so we won't be debating with them about the direction that they're going in, and we'll have lots of opportunities as councillors to really thrash that out together at council and at my committee for the Environmental and Infrastructure Committee. So this presentation is going to be in 4 parts. I'm going to pass over to Vida to walk you through it, but there will be opportunities for questions after each section, so please just put your hand up and I'll add you to a speaking list. I don't think there's anyone online. We don't have a Zoom link, so, you know, let your colleagues know if they want to participate, they need to be here. And yeah, and we'll keep it respectful, and just want to acknowledge that all of our kaimahi have worked really hard on this entire kaupapa, so thank you very much for that. So I'm going to pass over to Liam.
Yeah, thanks. Kia ora. To the councillors, the team, the kaimahi, I've brought them all in here just to get some faces in front of you and explain that there's a huge machine behind this program. A strategic direction set by the previous council, and this is a combination of the transitional and transformational Cycleways team here. And there's a couple of slides later on. It's the early part of the presentation where Claire and Vita will talk to the team. We'll get some of the key leaders to stand up, and then they'll head back to their respective desks. But I thought it was important for you to see that the effort that is being deployed here in the city, and the very hard mahi that is going on. And we'll get the sort of comms component, engagement component, the technicians, the traffic safety people, and the designers to stand up and explain and show who they are and the work they do. So look, I wanted to just remind councillors of our catch-up we had at the zoo, actually, which was when we orientated everyone to the Planning Environment Committee, and I showed you that picture, an elevation picture of everyone in my Tier 3 management team and what they did. And I showed you this concept of on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground work, consenting, building things, all the way up to the clouds, the high strategic teams that are working for the benefit of the city. Sitting at the top, of course, are 2 key issues for the city, and I can ask you now what they are. I'm going to go to Tim Brown first. What is one of the biggest strategic issues you see for the city, Tim?
Sorry, do you mean in the context of this or in general?
In the context in general.
Improving relationships with the community.
Ka pai. So mana whenua partnerships are a massive piece of this work as we go in a strategic level and head towards the future direction this council set. I think it's fair to say housing, okay, a big one, right? And in that housing context, we had Sean Ordain in the Strategic Planning Unit effectively tripling the development capacity of the city through the proposed district plan, okay? And then what's the next one? Climate change, right. And we have Alison Howard there leading a very, very strategic conversation with the community with their engagement and behaviour change program about how people need to view the city differently and start living and thinking differently about their city and how it moves around. Okay, now as we drop down that elevation, we get to the city design space. One of the key things we can do in terms of getting the community to understand what it looks like to live differently is share the road space. And that's more of an equity issue. It's a public good. It's a piece of infrastructure that is shared. At the moment, it's fair to say that it is dominated by the private motor car, okay? And we all need to just accept that. And what we're trying to do with the Cycleways program is produce some room in that corridor for other people to travel safely in a low carbon way. All right, and that's really where Vita's team comes in and the Cycleways team come in. So they're at a tactical level, they're delivering on an opportunity and a choice that our citizens can make to move around the city differently. Okay, so as a governance team, I'm really keen on you guys staying at that strategic level and staying at the governance level and remembering those strategic settings of the city, whilst Vida and Claire now present the details and the entrails of the program. All right, I'll leave it there, and thank you for listening to me.
Kia ora, Liam, and kia ora koutou. Thank you for coming today. Liam's just stolen half my slides, so I will try and skim over them quickly. But where I wanted to start really was what we're going to cover today, so that you understand what we're working through, where I am going to present a quick scene setting, much of what Liam has just said, and then we're going to work into Panaki Ponaki. Paul will present the essence of that plan. We will then go in, and Hazel, our program manager for the bike network, will be presenting how we're governing and how we're managing this within the organisation to ensure that your decisions are brought to life. And then Claire's going to come in and talk about the projects which we're delivering at the moment and how we're working with partners and the communities on that. And between each of those sections, there'll be a chance for questions. We've put in some blue slides, so if you do have any questions, please save them till then, and then we'll get to them. So, the team. Claire, Hazel and Paul, you'll get to meet them as they come up and speak. But what we wanted to do was, as Liam said, bring up the team and show the team that's working behind the scenes to make sure what you have asked us to do becomes a reality in the streets of Wellington. So I'll get all the project managers to stand up, please. And if you just say your name and wave and sit down just from front to back. So Renee, if you kick off.
By the way.
Shout.
Come closer.
We can hear Renee.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
And then if we get the technical team to stand up, who are our technical engineer experts, which are across all projects. Great. And then we've also got a big crew of engagement and comms. If you can please stand up and say kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm Ollie. Kia ora, I'm Seth.
Kia ora, I'm Bridget.
Kia ora, I'm Alexander.
Kia ora, I'm Trish.
Kia ora, Coach, I'm Johnny.
Kia ora, I'm Greg.
All the comms people are really clear.
So thank you, team. So yeah, I just wanted to give some faces and some names and on the amazing work that they do every single day. So, and then as well, Brad, I just saw him sneak out. He had a meeting he had to go to. He, of course, is integrated totally into this program. And Stephen Hart, who we couldn't find a picture of. I tried to find a cartoon or something to put in instead. But he is leading the delivery team and making sure that we're delivering these projects on the ground and that we've got the right staff in the right places and the contractors lined up to deliver. So many of you will have seen this slide before, but it's going back to what Liam says. We've got a climate and ecological emergency declared. We know there's a housing crisis, and as we change our city, we need to change the way that we live and we move around to address these major issues. The spatial plan, which was approved, is our blueprint for how we develop the city, how we grow and how we house the 50 to 80,000 Wellingtonians that are expected to come in the next 30 years. It also reconfirms our sustainable transport hierarchy, and it ensures that our urban and transport planning go hand in hand. As we grow, we need to keep our streets flowing and rebalance distribution towards movement. Getting more people walking, scooting, biking, and using PT is essential for our people's and the city's health and well-being. A safe and connected bike network can increase the equity for our transport network, and while buses and bus lanes also increase the viability of transport for all. And as we're working through our bike network, we're also making sure that where we can, we're installing bus lanes and improving pedestrian condition. This creates more people, more space for people also in their disposable budgets for using their money for other things. We know there's a demand and that people want this. E-bikes and electric scooters in particular influencing the choices for Wellingtonian and flattening our hills and lets us take advantage of the compact topography that we have. We've seen that if there is infrastructure, people will use it. We're also seeing Auckland and other cities around the world that we see how the people-centric changes to our transport network can benefit everyone, including businesses, and increase the vibrancy of our city. We're already also seeing this in our changes on Dixon Street. Currently in our central city, 48% of our space is between buildings, and of the space, 35% is footpaths, public spaces and green spaces, 37% is carriageway and parking. So how we got to where we are today, and this is a bit of a full slide, so I'll step you through it from left to right. In 2019, this really kicked off with the declaration, as I said earlier, of the climate and ecological emergency. In 2021, the Council decided through the long-term plan to accelerate the delivery of the bike network and to create a rapid rollout approach. In March, Paniki Poniki, the bike network plan was adopted, and then afterwards, we sent that to Waka Kotahi Board for the program business case for approval, which was approved in August this year. Currently, if you can see the Here We Are line, we are in the process of delivering in the transformational area. We have got the Evans Bay parade improvements, and we're working on Brooklyn Hill. In the transitional area, the team is working on delivering and installing Botanics to the City and Newtown, and we're working with consultation on the Aro Valley connections and Nile connections in our early engagement phase of Kilburnie, Thorndon and Berhampore and Newtown. The team will go into more detail on this in a minute, but I think it's also worth pointing out here that this financial year we'll be looking at having around 17 kilometres approved for construction, and that's almost double what we've delivered in the last 5 years. So we've taken your decision through the long-term plan, accelerated, and you can see by the team here that we're getting it done. So I will now ask if there's any questions. Otherwise, I will hand over to Paul. No? Paul, all yours. Oh.
Sorry about that. Can you just go back to the previous slide? What I'm curious about is, which is actually quite impressive in terms of the speed with which things have progressed, but how locked and loaded is each stage? What decisions have I know that there's an overarching decision, and we've obviously got the map, but are the specifics actually locked in the Paniki part, or is there still sort of uncertainty or possibility of change in respect of the specific streets and whatnot that are actually chosen from here?
Yeah, so Hayes will get into a bit more detail in her section about what decisions you'll be making as councillors, but at a high level, Paniki Poniki locked in which streets where the network will be delivered on. And now as we go out project for project, it's about how we best place that into the context of that street. So those are the decisions that will be made.
Thank you.
Councillor Free.
Not working. Yes, Paniki Poniki not locked in a primary and a secondary network. Can you explain what the intention was, the difference between the primary and the secondary? Because it now seems that some of them, the secondary is being rolled out at the same time as the primary in a similar fashion.
Yep, that's actually, we've included that in the presentation, and Paul will go into detail about that in this next section. So if we can do that explanation, and then we can ask further questions in the next question time.
No more questions? Awesome.
Paul, come up here.
So good morning, councillors. Paul Barker is my name. I've been with council for some time. The current role here in council is the Street Transformation Manager within Sea Design. I've been sharing that in February next year, on the 2nd of February, we're 30 years with council. So, so that brings... It wasn't why I said that. Very young, yes. But look, that's allowed me to bring a whole lot of experience to the team, and for many of these, it's not our first time at trying to make the transformations in some of these streets. I like where we're heading this time around. I think we've got a lot more energy behind us, and things like Thorndon Quay. I think I had 3 attempts at Thorndon Quay before we finally managed to change the angle parking to parallel. So good things take time.
In court cases.
And court cases, yes. Cool. Look, so I've got about 6 or 7 slides to get through, and again, we'll come back. We'll finish on the blue screen, and that's where we'll open up for questions. Then I'll hand over to Hazel, and she'll take us through the next section. So this is just a recap of how we got to the Panaki Bike Network Program and the Bike Network Plan. This came from a set of principles that we brought here to committee, and committee agreed that these were the key principles that would guide us in setting up and establishing that plan. The 2 on the left there, but they have the asterisks, was where the importance lay. So thinking that we wanted a network that would maximise uptake. So that was critical, and the other was the cohesive routes to get people to where they want to go. So it was a bigger network than we'd worked on previously, and of course the other principles remain there. It's probably fair to say that safety isn't there because it underpins everything that we do is around safety. We know safety is one of the biggest drivers to get people out there on the network on their bikes. And equally, it's part of a multimodal network, and we'll see as we're starting to roll these programs out, it's not just bike focused. We're focusing on public transport, scootering and walking just as much as we are on the bike stuff. So about this time last year, we consulted. So after we workshopped with councillors, we then went out and consulted on this network. So it's up there in green. Lots of submissions. Really pleased to see the responses we got that were so positive. To have 87% of respondents supporting or strongly supporting the plan, and 89%, telling us that they thought if this plan was delivered, it would make the change that we were looking for. Fantastic stuff. And when we brought that back to committee for approval on the 10th of March this year, that was endorsed wholeheartedly. So, and to Councillor Free's point, this was just thinking about the network. And so we developed a strategic network that was made up of primary and secondary routes. We haven't showed the local connections, but the local connections are just as important part of those of our bike network. We acknowledge that all rides start and end somewhere, and generally where they start and where they end isn't on the strategic network. They're off that, so we've got to always remember that we need to think about all those other routes as well. But our strategic network, made up of primary and secondary, primary being pretty much the central city to our suburban centres, and then secondary was really from those town centres or suburban centres out to the more local catchment into the schools and the like. I want to stress here the point that form and function differ. So when we think about the function of the roads, that's what I've just talked about, the primary, secondary and local network. And they each form a different function in their network, but the form on which they take is dictated by the guidance that we're given around good design. And we know that where the proximity of passing motorists is close, and where the speed of those motorists is fast, and where there's lots of larger vehicles in that's when we need to have the more separation. So where we've got higher volumes, higher speeds, and lots of heavies, buses, trucks, absolutely we need to have the separation. At the other end of that is that when we have low and slow, so low speeds, low volumes, we can get away with sharing, and so we don't need to provide that separation infrastructure. But it might be that in some cases, even on the secondary network, we still need to provide that separation. So just because the function of the road says it's a secondary, if there is the speed and volume along that road, we'll still need to provide separation. So some people are getting confused between that primary will be separated, secondary won't be separated. That's more about where we're putting it and the mix. I'm going to come to this one. So we were given that we had that entire network, and if I just recall across the entire city made up of a mixture of primary and secondary, we progressed 6 options of how we might then go about delivering that 166 kilometres of network. And these are the 6 options that we looked at. We quickly considered but didn't progress those 3 at the bottom there. But so the 3 that we took through multi-criteria assessment to look at which would be the best network, the best way in delivering that network were the 3 that we've got there in bold in the front. So, sorry, you're sharing this one, so
Yes, sorry.
So the first was, area-based mixing primary and secondary. So we divided the city into 16 areas, and we looked at what would come out of that. The second was focus on the primary network first, and then do the secondary network. And then third, just go and do all the unsafe stuff first. Didn't matter where it was across the city, so it was higgledy-piggledy. We'll just go and focus on safety, and we'll just keep coming down the list until we got the entire network in place. So those are the 3 options that we considered. We assessed them against those bullet points at the bottom there, and the one that came through the strongest was that if we focused area first. So we go into an area and we do everything in that area, whether it's primary, secondary, and some of those local connections if they're important. And then move to the next area. And that enabled us to maximise the benefit. So not only were we doing one strategic route, high important route, and we're also doing the other local networks alongside it, the secondary networks that supported it. And that came through really strongly, and we business cased that through to Waka Kotahi and accepted, been peer reviewed, and we've been funded on the basis that we will do these area-wide, do everything at the same time. So think about our project pathway then. So on the left, and Vita's outlined how this came about, and we did the citywide engagement on this, and under our significance engagement policy, the bigger engagement on the plan was of high significance, and it was treated as such in the way where we undertook that consultation, and that focused on the bigger network. As we move through to the projects, as we start moving across the page, the significance of those projects drops down to a medium significance. And I think that's important to remember that we've already done a high significance engagement across the whole program. So now we're just talking about the projects and implementing them. Our pathway through those is twofold. First, we go into that area or that route and do the quick build or transitional approach, and Claire's going to, when she gets her chance to speak, we'll go through a lot of detail about what transitional projects look like. The diagram, if you can see there, is trying to show that it's paint and sticks, minimal infrastructure to establish the network. And that's what we heard clearly is one of our principles to get the stuff out there was get it done quickly. Just get the network out as quick as we can. And then that would follow with the street transformation projects. So those are the projects that I look after, which are longer term changes, in some cases a lot more expensive, and we work through the business cases to get those in place. There is a couple of projects that we have jumped straight to transformation, and we'll talk about those when Hazel comes through the program, and we can explain why they're not going through the transitional first. Cool. And again, more on that development pathway and looking at the difference between the transitional and transformational. So again, the bike network plan on the left and the parking policy, that's all been approved, and Council made those decisions earlier this year in adopting the bike network plan back in March. And then the transitional program as it steps through, and I know there is a lot more detail around this. And Claire will cover that off. But just really we're following Council's embedded project management processes. So we plan a lot of gateways for ourselves to go through. In terms of opportunities then when it comes to committee, we've got that first committee decision, right? Yep. So as we go through development plan, and after that, just before we start deliver, we've got a committee decision for traffic resolution. I just want to call that out. That's the point where we've introduced the traffic resolutions in this process. You'll be aware that the Minister of Transport has promoting a bill through Parliament or legislation through Parliament will allow us to do the reshaping streets legislation. Now, if that goes through, that's the bit that would allow us not to do a traffic resolution at that point and to follow up with a traffic resolution at the end of the engage, tweak and evaluate phase. So that's the approach we were proposing to use using the TMP, and we've changed from that and we've gone back and we're doing traffic resolutions and that committee decision in the middle there of the blue. But the legislation may allow us to, in the future, move through that and get our learnings, tweak it, and then we'll bring back a decision to committee at the end there. As we move through to the street transformation projects, at this stage we're expecting that they would follow the more traditional approach. The develop phase for a street transformation project can be anything from 12 to 24 months. And at the end of that, lots of engagement, and we would bring a traffic resolution based on the concept plans. So again, we're not looking to test those plans. They've already been tested through the transitional, so we should be pretty well right. And we'll bring a committee decision back to council at that point. Cool. Just
Sorry, can you just go back one second? I just want to pose a specific.
Cool. Okay, so so hopefully you've all got the slides. They were sent out last night. Oh, this morning, sorry. Yeah. Cool, so just my last slide. So just touching on the benefits from the program and where they arise from. And so there's more people cycling is clearly one of our biggest benefits. The network optimisation, health, affordability, low emissions and transport is the big part of more people cycling. More people being able to, more people able to and living car free or car free light. Also, can't you? It's not car free, car light anyway. More of the network delivered quickly is a big benefit of the way we're doing this. More diversity in who's cycling, and for the last 7-8 years, in our annual surveys, we've been counting the number of women cycling, the number of people we observe coming into the city as a bit of an indicator as to whether we're successful in delivering the network. And fewer people harmed on our roads. There's an opportunity there to do general road safety as we're doing these corridors, not just focusing on cycle safety. One of the advantages of the transitional approach is it provides the evidence for the uptake ahead of those bigger transformational investments. We'll be coming back to committee seeking big approvals. The bulk of the 226 million will go in the transformational area, and to get that approval, we will be able to use the evidence we've got to take that forward. And then the other that we've got there is we know that the city's in transformation. It's an area of change. We're going to see that those that are currently travelling by motor car are going to find it really difficult while we've got road cones all over the city, and by providing this quick build network for bikes, it provides an alternative while we're transitioning away from the current network layout into something that's exciting and multimodal. So that's the end of my few slides. Opportunity for now for questions on any of those, and then we'll follow up programming from Hazel and
Yeah,
Morgan.
so we've got a speaking list. Just put your hand up if you want to be added to it. So we'll start with Holden.
Kia ora, Paul. Thanks for that. Just a question around the traffic resolutions. So presumably those will go to Regs Committee?
That's my understanding, is that all of the traffic resolutions through here will go to Regs.
Cool. Thank you.
Kapai and Iona.
Thank you. I love the car-free lifestyle ambition, so we'll keep working on that. If there's a change in government, does that have any impact on the funding? Like, how much more are we relying on Waka Kotahi for money?
So the program business case that we submitted, which was the bike network plan, Panaki Ponaki bike network plan, the version of that that went to Waka Kotahi. It's not me, is it? Cool. So the Waka Kotahi have accepted our program business case and have adopted that. So now we will put projects up against that business case. As long as there is funding available in the activity class, we'll put our application in alongside everybody else, but we've got an overall BCR of 2.1 for our program, which is really high. Those initial programs are coming through with a lot higher BCR. So project BCRs that are really high are likely to get funded over and above others. Being a major metro, benefits will come through a lot stronger than some of the provincial applications. So not being unfair to them, but there is a bigger bang for the buck by investing in cycling in Wellington than there would be in other provincial centres. So we think we have a fairly good opportunity to continue to get a reasonable share of the walking and cycling activity class.
So I missed your number because of the distortion. What was the bigger percentages?
You just need to use your microphone. Sorry.
Sorry, it's just that there was a distortion at the because of the microphone malfunction. What was the percentage that Waka Kotahi's funding?
So for the transformation projects, 51% of so Wellington City's financial assistance rate is 51%, and that will be reviewed every 3 years, but it hasn't changed much from that over the last 20 or 30 years. With a BCR of 2.1 allows us to have quite a strong case to get a fair chunk of that activity class. Vida's going to jump in.
Yeah, because one of the things that, and I think we're allowed to say this, is that we applied for the transitional program to have SURF funding. So that is what SURF?
It's the Climate Emergency Response Fund.
Climate Emergency Response Fund funding, and they've written back to us and said that that has been approved along with our behaviour change program and some pedestrianisation or pedestrian improvements in Kilburnie. So we're not currently clear on what that percentage, and that's something we're going to have to work through with the Waka Kotahi, but it's until now we had expected that the transitional program was 100% funded through council, and we will now be receiving an income for that program, so that's great news.
That's awesome. So the next question then is, so the government could reduce the funding through the GPS, is that right?
Correct.
Yep. And then if they do, let's hope they won't, but if they do, then we would need to fund it from our own budget. Liam, is there, so we'd have to put that in for an LTP, but I'm just thinking contingency planning.
Well, it's a cost pressure. If it eventuates, it will be a cost pressure we'll have to consider within the LTP and even the AP. But when will the GPS decision come through, Paul?
That's about this time next year, isn't it?
Yeah, okay, so it'll be a long term.
It's usually a year after the election. So it generally takes them a year to remake a GPS if there's a change of government. So it's probably 2 years away.
Yeah. So LTP, if anything, yeah.
It's really unlikely, as I started to say, I've been in this game for a while. There has always been a walking and cycling activity class as the size of that bucket. We stand a good chance of being at the top of that allocation. So we may not get everything we ask for, but it's unlikely we're going to get no funding out of it. Just touching on the SURF funding. So the decision that committee made when they adopted the Pāniki Pōniki, just go back one, back in March, was that of the 226 million, the $50 million towards the transitional program that Claire looks after was to not require subsidy. So if we could get subsidy, it was great, but it was to go ahead 100% rate funded if need be. The first two projects of Botanics and Newtown, both to the city, attracted the standard FAR, so 51%. So that's great. We managed to get it out of that activity class, but they have then run out of money in that. So we were told we weren't going to get any more transitional funded from this NLTP period. However, the government then announced the Streets for People funding, so the Newtown to Beremport to Newtown attracted a 90% subsidy on that, so that's great. And now we've got the remaining part of the program over the next 18 months to 2 years. We have had confirmation from Waka Kotahi that will attract funding up to 33 million. So that's something in the order of anything between 80 and 100% funding on that. So it'll be a high rate. We don't know the details on that. We're just working through with the officials. The minister wants to make an announcement very soon as to who's getting what and what they're going to do with it. So that's absolutely fantastic. So where this council effectively was prepared to invest up to 50 million at its own cost, it's going to get the bulk of that now back through central government. So really, more money than we ever expected to get from government.
Woohoo! Shout out to Minister Wood. All right. I'm going to ask a question then. We've got Sarah. So my question was just on the key principles slide when you said that safety is not in there, which I understand, kind of thinking the same thing, as it's kind of like a non-negotiable. But how do you make sure that the secondary cycleways aren't like super unsafe, like some of the ones you see in Auckland where people are like dying because they're just so unsafe? Like, how do you have like bare minimum kind of things, especially for that?
Yeah, no,
secondary
absolutely.
network?
And if I can just flick back to that slide, it's the bottom right is that best practice design. You know, that was a key principle, is that we want best practice design. We don't want just something that ticks the box. There's, you know, there's a cycle symbol in the road, so therefore it's ticked and it's part of our network. You've told us that you do want good design, and it's safe and part of that entire network. So, and we've funded to do it right, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing it right.
And then my other question was just the kind of interface between the transitional network and the transformational network. Will that kind of prevent things like the Oriental Bay cycleway situation happening, where there might be some issues with like pipes or something? Will you be able to identify that during the transitional phase to make sure that we're not remediating a transformational cycleway early in its lifespan?
I was going to say yes, but the thought is that, so with the transitional program, we're trying to do as least impact as we can. So it's trying to do what's the minimum viable product to make it better. We wouldn't always be laying asphalt, but the hope is that where we do actually create some infrastructure, we really want to get that right the first time. And we talk about this pathway to permanence. So if we're going to invest more than paint and sticks, that we want that to be in a position so that when the transformation project comes along, it's not ripping that stuff out and having to do it again. So we do want to try and get that right, so that where we are putting in signals or concrete, pouring concrete, that it's there for a long term. And you'll see through some of the transitional projects, they're proposing to put in new zebra crossings, and which is a bit of permanent infrastructure. We need to think about whether that's in the right place for the future, not just for now. So that's, again, ensuring that we are on the pathway to permanence.
Cool. And the last one is Sarah.
Yeah. So I'm still grappling a little bit with the secondary and primary thing. The decision was considered significant because there were going to be significant changes to people's streets. And that was the reason that we had to go through a complete consultation process on this. What do you think the understanding was in the difference between the primary and the secondary? Is it just, as you've now said, connections to the city versus connections to schools and local areas of interest?
Look, and we've certainly talked before about the difference between form and function. So function is quite clearly about primary and secondary.
Okay.
So we were really clear that the function of that bit of the network, we could quite clearly tell whether it was the dark green or light green as to whether it was a part of the primary or secondary. We got some good feedback on that. There was many bits of there's parts of the network that the community told us that we had that wrong, and that some needed to go from secondary to primary, and others didn't need to be primary, they could drop back to secondary. So we made a few tweaks, and that was accepted through the consultation. So we think we got the network right in terms of primary and secondary.
So what was the rationale that staff, for example, changed the primary route from around Tawa College to follow Duncan Street to McClellan Street rather than going on the existing pathway? I mean, what were some of the thinking behind the primary and secondary? And the reason I'm getting to this is because one of the things we heard clearly on the campaign is that the community has lost trust and confidence in council's decision-making process, and we were really roasted for that on the campaign. So for me, this actually goes to the heart of it. What did we consult on? What did the community expect from that consultation, and how are we delivering on that? Because it certainly wasn't my personal expectation we'd be rolling out the secondary with the primary. And then there seems to have been some work done to do an area-based rollout, but I'm concerned that that wasn't the expectation from the community, or even looking at some of the decisions made at committee where things were changed from primary to secondary. You know, what was the point of that if we're just going to roll the whole lot out together at a roughly the same standard? Because that's what seems to be the case.
Cool. So first off, the changes that moved some from secondary to primary, and I think there's most...
And vice versa.
Sarah, let him answer.
There wasn't too many, I think, that went backwards, but most of them, the changes were made, were outlined in the table. Joe and I worked on the responses to the submissions. We did see the network grow considerably, so we had a lot of requests for other roads to be added. So they came in, and some of the existing roads that we consulted on changed. There was a table that accompanied the committee report on the 10th of March that outlined the rationale for why, and the example you gave around Tawa College, where Duncan through to Hinau changed from secondary to primary. The rationale for that should have been accompanied. I haven't looked at it specifically for your question, but I would be confident that if we went back to that committee paper, the explanation as to why that change would be in there. And because you were asked for every change that you made from the consulted on network to the one you adopted, there was a table outlining the change and why it was to change. Yeah. So I'm hoping it's in there, that rationale's in there. I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards. So, and then secondly, you talked about the expectation from the community as to where we rolled out, the order in which we rolled it out. We gave a couple of examples of where the network would be rolled out. That was part of the consultation. In my mind, we were always rolling it out across an area by area approach, and primary and secondary. Again, the form of the secondary was dictated by the street it was on, not by whether it was a primary or a secondary.
Okay. So just going back to that, because I want to get this crystal clear. So as a result of the committee meeting, parts of Taurimu Street, Moxham Ave, Kupe Street and Hamilton Road were added into the secondary network. So if you were going to do an area-based rollout in Kilburnie, why are you not considering putting those streets in along with the secondary parts of Onipu Road and Cootes Street, which are now being rolled out at the same time?
I think that
I actually do want to understand this.
Sarah? Yeah, I know you do. You have brought it up, and
yeah, I have.
I think you will get the answers you need. I think we've got the policy rationale between the primary and the secondary routes, but the team have told me that they are happy to sit down one-on-one with people to make sure that you've got the information you need to give the public confidence.
But it's not just about me, it's about
Sarah,
the public
I think
having
it's heard,
confidence.
and I think they will have a meeting with you, so yeah.
If you're happy to, we can take it offline, and otherwise Claire could jump in now. But
I just want to say that Moxham Ave and Taurimu Street are part of the City Streets package, so Let's Get Wellington Moving are looking at that part of the area at the moment. So we're also having conversations about scopes of who's doing what, so that sits within the City Streets package.
And I also have a question about speed, but I've realised I've had a few questions, so I'll come back to that.
Cool. And there'll be more opportunities for questions, so we'll chuck you back on the list. Tim next, and then Tony.
Paula, I just wanted to confirm, so when this money isn't holding you up, that's the first question. I mean, obviously, if we've committed and we think actually we're going to do better out of Waka Kotahi funding, that's great. So money's definitely not an impediment. What about resources? Because we heard from Wellington Water that even though we can give them lots of money, they don't have the people to actually build these things. I mean, are resources okay as well?
Yeah, so probably in the next section of the presentation where Hazel's going to talk to, although Brad's coming up to talk about that now, but Brad gets a chance to talk about it shortly around procurement. So we've got a slide specifically to allow Brad to come up and answer that one. Unless you want to jump in now, Brad.
You can talk about procurement, Brad. I might just chip in as well. I think what's interesting about it's just focus a little bit on project management resources and program management resources. So as a manager, I'm looking after the recruitment of the group and looking at how the Cycleways team have been recruiting in the past as opposed to water infrastructure. Tim, what I think is really interesting is the passion that the staff have for their job. So it's not difficult generally to recruit for the Cycleways program, which I find really unusual. And you do that, and the reasons for that, I think, is people, it's that Daniel Pink thing, right? Master autonomy and purpose. We give a lot of purpose to people who are in the project management but sustainability profession if they come to work for Wellington City Council. So actually, surprisingly, not hard to recruit for. Wellington Water, infrastructure, complex projects, not a great brand, very hard to recruit.
And water's not so important as cycling, so...
Well,
well done. That's great.
I just thought that was an answer, but I mean, Brad can talk in detail in regards to the procurement side of things, because I know materials and labour in particular are difficult, and that's from a delivery point of view, that is definitely holding up some aspects of the program and our other water infrastructure investments.
So Brad has got 11, but I think we can talk about it on the procurement slide, which is in a few slides.
Plenty of time. There's just one more question, then we'll move on from Tony.
Yes, thank you. I mean, just listening to the conversation, it seems that the terms primary and secondary are actually very confusing words. I think if they've got different focuses and purposes, they should be named after what their focus and purpose is. Saying primary and secondary says one's greater and more important than the other, and yet in terms of any practical sense, they are being dealt with as similar or equal.
Yes, totally.
So, and I think that may be part of the reason. I want to ask a question about how the split of the implementation of the cycleways has been done between Let's Get Wellington Moving and the City Council. What was the criteria? I mean, I just find it a bit confusing that most of the roads in Johnsonville are part of Let's Get Wellington Moving, but some of the roads are not, and have been dealt with separately by the city, and so, it doesn't. So just can you take me through the logic of what went to Let's Get Wellington Moving?
I'll be drifting into Hazel's presentation, so she's going to touch on that. Perhaps if I can...
Just park that one. Do you want to
I can park it, or I can just briefly. So while I've been here a long time, part of that I got seconded across into Let's Get Wellington Moving and headed up the program business case for the indicative business case for city streets. So that's the project that's currently rolling out through Johnsonville from Let's Get Wellington Moving. Now the rationale for why projects got into that was around bus priority. So we took the work that the council had done around the bus priority action plan, took the key corridors that were identified on that, worked through a business case. We've taken the 8 highest or most important bus priority corridors that came out of the city's work, took them into Let's Get Wellington Moving, and they've now been accepted that they will become Let's Get Wellington Moving corridors to roll out. So they were there primarily to deliver on bus, but when they go in, it's a multimodal answer. So they are looking in those corridors to how to make it better for bikes. So the parts of the, Vita's going to jump in, parts of the, no, you're not going to jump in. So parts of the Paniki Poniki, the bike network that overlap with the work in the Let's Get Wellington Moving area, have been handed to Let's Get Wellington Moving to make sure that they are delivering on our promise for Paniki Poniki, as well as the expectations that we had around a bus priority action plan. So that's how they got in there and how we divvied up the rationale. Hazel will go through and show which parts of the network lie with each and how we're working with them to ensure that they're delivering on the same expectations that we're giving to our communities.
Cool.
So just as a follow-up, when Let's Get Wellington Moving does outline what they're proposing, do they consult with the City Council? And so you've got a sign off, if you like, early on to say, yep, that lines up with what the city would do.
Being consistent with our approach and consistent with the principles that this committee or this council has given us to develop our bike network program.
Cool.
So those same principles would apply.
Sweet. Cool. We're just going to move on. So we've got 2 more questions. Yep. You can see the Zoom. So if you just want to keep them quick so we can hear from Brad before he has to go. So we've got Ben and then Nico, and then we're going to move on.
Well, look, Tony pretty much covered it, so I just wanted to reiterate that understanding of how things keep consistent when you've got 2 different business units now, Let's Get Wellington Moving and Wellington City Council driving this program. So really interested to understand how we don't get clashes or them going off in different ideas. So I'll look forward to that in the next part.
Cool. And Nico?
Kia ora, thanks for this. It looks great so far. My question is, are there any negative implications to establishing continuity as the area by area basis is implemented? Like, for example, would it have perhaps been more conducive to a flow of like an entire journey to build from point A to point B, for example, from an outer suburb into the city centre? This is not a criticism, I just don't understand.
It was one of the considerations. It was one of the options we looked at. I can't recall all the rationale for how we scored across the MCA, but I know that by far the area approach won out, and part of the rationale for why that was deemed to be better was that we ran the risk of the smaller bits of the network. So if we pick on the northern suburbs, which is the key consideration through there is along Middleton Road or the Tawa, the Johnsonville connection. But there's a couple of smaller connections that on their own may never have got up, that would have been pushed to the end of the program. We think there's a reasonably important connection up through into Granada North. that would get done as part of that whole northern package all at once, and then it actually leverages off the investment of Middleton Road, so we maximise our return, which was the critical to the direction set by committee.
Cool.
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, I was just also, Nico, going to say, I think from a community perspective, there's a lot of consultation fatigue out there. And because of the traffic resolution process, we are required to consult on every single thing we do. And when we make that conversation just this, when really people want to talk about how they're going to get from here to the city, it's much easier to have a conversation at an area-wide level. It makes a lot more sense to people. So I think then it means you don't have to come back and have the same kind of conversation again in a few years on different pieces of it. And even in some of these areas we are Newtown, they're tired from engaging over and over and over on it. So I think there's also that kind of consultation perspective on putting it together.
And Vito's just going to add to that too.
Yep, and I think one of our key principles is that we're working out from the central city outwards. So in the northern, we've got Thornquay Hut Road already established. In the south, we're now building from the city out to Newtown. And to the west is those next areas of focus to connect those suburbs to the west. In terms of the primary and secondary strategic network, there's a really good explanation in the Bike Network plan on pages 54 and 55, and that is cascaded down from the One Network framework, which is national guidance on how we define our networks. We also do it for our cars and our pedestrian and any modes of transport.
Cool.
All right, I'll leave you there and hand over to Hazel.
Thanks, Paul.
Kia ora. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Kia ora koutou. Hazel Durkin, Bike Network Program Manager. So kind of on the opposite end of Paul, I've only been here since June, so just a few months. Originally hail from the UK. So yeah, I'm going to talk you through the kind of dry stuff about program management. Sorry, do I drive this?
Yep.
Okay. So a new governance structure has been established to take a program approach to delivering the strategic bike network. And that's to focus decision efforts at the right level of influence and expertise. So we've kind of got two or three levels of focus going on. So kind of high-level program focus. We have elected members who approved Pāniku Pōneke and approved the LTP and also annual plan budgets. We have ELT, who ensure the program remains aligned to strategic priorities throughout the program life cycle, and also appoint the senior responsible owner, which is Liam Hodgetts, who's accountable for the successful delivery of the program. And Liam is supported by a program board to help him make decisions, and they kind of come from their respective areas of expertise, so that he's got that full breadth of knowledge to help him make those decisions. And at the project level, we also have elected members who approve traffic resolutions on a case-by-case basis. ELT and the program board keep a high-level overview of progress and also deal with any risks that come up from the project that could become program risks or organizational risks. And then the project managers, the project board and the project managers manage the project teams to design and deliver the outputs of the projects. And they manage the project level risks. And as I say, escalate those up to each board. So that's the three lines of defence, and really the right people focusing on risk and their areas of expertise. These next two slides show kind of high level what the transitional and transformational projects that are in train, and then those that are still to be confirmed, so they're in the pipeline. So we call this, so we're looking at a kind of a segment of time to plan out. So it's the the next 3 years, and that's called a tranche. And we need to ensure that we have all of the processes, structures in place to support the successful delivery of these projects, and also managing them rather than managing them as individual projects. We can achieve benefits and outcomes from managing them together, so we can enhance the outcomes. So transitional projects, as you can see at the top there, which shouldn't be news to you, and then those at the bottom are still to be confirmed, so we're working through dependencies and some of our strategic priorities and our vision for the programme to make sure that's all aligned and prioritised. So that's the transitional and the transformational there. So let's finish what we've started and then focus on that area base, as we've discussed in some detail already. And then we also have a key element, which is following up from the transitional, so making sure that we're learning those lessons and refining the designs and really getting those good outcomes to the community. And I'll skip to procurement. Brad, do you want to talk to this?
Yeah. So from a procurement perspective, I think full disclosure, resourcing has been difficult. It has been probably a limiting factor to us moving really fast, us accessing resources in the Wellington region. So when it comes to physical works contractors, there just aren't that many players around. From a consultancy and professional services piece, it's not as difficult. We do make use of the all of government panel to access consultants to do design work and that sort of thing. But I think one of our, and Vida, tell me if I'm off here, but I think one of our key points of where we've been struggling has been with physical work suppliers. So I spent the better part with my team looking at this and what we could do about it over the last few months. And so there's a tender that's gone out on Get yesterday, actually, where we spent a few months last year where we engaged with local suppliers, and we had an RFI, so a request for information, where we spoke to local suppliers, particularly from organizations like Amotai, to talk to local contractors to find out what makes it easy for you to work with the council. How would you be able to work with the council? What are your drivers? What are the limitations as to why you haven't worked with the council before? Starting to understand what is your capability, what can you do, and what are you capable of delivering. So for the transitional cycleways, our procurement approach at the moment is transitional cycleways, we're going to be using local suppliers. We're using local suppliers that are based in Wellington, that are homed in Wellington, and there are going to be multiple suppliers on a panel. From that, we think that we're going to not only be able to deliver on the program, but also deliver really good social outcomes for Wellington through this panel. The larger projects, the transformational projects, will still be open-tendered across the supplier market, but we are also looking at incorporating the social procurement into that around using the local suppliers that are on panels as preferred subcontractors. So to make it really practical, you might end up with a local supplier, Joe's Contracting, who's working on a transitional cycleway project, and he might not do everything. He might just be installing the hit sticks, and then Sam's Contracting comes behind that and does some paint on the road. But part of the agreement is that when we get a big project like Evans Bay, and let's say Evans Bay gets dished out to Downer, for instance, that Joe and Sam are subcontractors to Downer and are preferred subcontractors to Downer, so that they can start to also increase their capability to pick up more than just hit sticks and paint on the road. So we think that this procurement approach, whilst quite novel, and all our procurement needs to be approved by Waka Kotahi, and it's been a bit of a pain trying to get that approval, but we think that we're on the right track, and from a resourcing perspective, we anticipate by early 2023 we'll be well resourced to be able to deliver on the program. At the moment, though, we do have contractors working on the program. It's just this is a way for us to move a bit faster.
That's so awesome.
That was it from us. Any
Oh, cool. So take a speaking order, but that's really helpful to hear, Brad, and awesome to know that we're procuring locally, because that was, we were a big fan of that last term, and it's just another kind of benefit on top of everything that network was already providing. So thank you for letting us know about that. Okay, so I had, so who wants to ask a question? So I got Holden and Sarah. Okay, cool. We'll start there, and then we'll have a break. So Sarah. Cool, yeah. You can start, Sarah. Yeah.
Sorry, but this does sort of go back. I indicated I still had some other questions about our previous topic. The comment was made that some of the streets in the eastern suburbs have been added to the Let's Get Welling Moving package, although we were approved to add them to Pānaki Pōnaki in our committee meeting. What's the criteria for streets in Pānaki Pōnaki to actually be managed underneath the Let's Get Welling Moving package instead?
I can speak a little bit to that. I don't know if you remember, about a year ago, I held my hand up and said, Let's Get Wellington Moving will be delivering the network that is in the central city, so the hand, and then there's a number of key routes which Paul described out of the city, which Let's Get Wellington Moving City Streets is considering. And we don't think we're going to get all of them being delivered through Let's Get Wellington Moving, but we were waiting at that time to understand which of the ones Let's Get Wellington Moving would be going to. That's more clear now, and City Streets is working with two tranches. A first tranche, and I can't remember the exact projects that are included in that. Claire or Paul will know that. And then that second tranche, which will come afterwards. So Let's Get Wellington Moving, we have always said that Let's Get Wellington Moving will be delivering part of it. That was the pink lines on our network map. And that is being defined through those two tranches. So which ones are?
So relevant to the east, Sarah, they have a CBD to Miramar package, and that includes Taurimo, Moxham, along Cobham Drive. I think they're looking for some bus priority improvements, and then out all the way to Miramar Town Centre. So that's within the scope of their City Streets project. And because it was part of Tranche 1 and moving, relatively quickly, it didn't make sense for us to sort of double in there, whereas some of their Tranche 2 things like Karori, they haven't got on the program for a long time, and that's Tranche 2, but we felt for the bike network it's really important that that connection gets made sooner, so we are looking to bring that one into a transitional approach, but working really closely with them because they have some targeted improvements on the Karori route. So yeah, it is quite complex, but basically we can give you the program of the city streets and the scope of all those projects.
Yeah, I feel as if there's a little bit of a loose end there. It's been good to actually clarify this a little bit verbally, but maybe even an email to councillors clarifying what was approved to be in Pānaki Pōnaki, but subsequently will be managed through Let's Get Welling Moving.
Yeah, and I know that you've also got a briefing on Let's Get Wellington Moving on Friday,
yeah,
so there may be some more clarity.
But it'd be quite good to maybe just be absolutely 100% crystal clear around this table how things are being delivered. And I guess financially, if we're going to be getting money from the government to deliver Pānaki Pōnaki, is it more advantageous or less advantageous for us, or equal, to have it delivered under Let's Get Welling Moving? And can we have some advice on that?
I think we'll probably get, once we have all our information, once we've done our induction day on Friday with Let's Get Wellington Moving, and once we've finished the presentation, I think we might have more of a clearer idea, but I don't know that anyone can answer that.
Okay, and the other thing I wanted to ask about is the speeds. Now there's a proposal on the table for some quite radical speed changes. Has that been thought out in terms of how that will improve the safety of some of these streets, secondary streets and other connector streets? And are we kind of, have we actually totally factored that in? Because, you know, I want to get value for money from the money we're spending.
Well, and the short answer is yes, haven't we? I mean, it's
Sure. The speed's happening. There are some very small minor speed tweaks that we are wrapping into some of our projects where there are just imminently sensible things to do in the short term. But some of the larger, more sort of, I guess, bigger, longer stretches, we are not including in ours because it's being looked at a citywide street level. But we're definitely bearing in mind when we come to design, okay, well, we know in a few years that sort of street would probably, if approved, be a 30, in which case we're in that kind of low and slow environment and we can design. There's an example on Tacey Street of this happening right now. But having said that, just changing a speed limit doesn't necessarily, you know, changing that posted sign doesn't necessarily mean that all cars magically go under 30. And so we are needing to think about the physical characteristics of the street as well as the posted speed limit changing so that it actually physically becomes a slow speed street as well.
Cool. Yep. Sweet. No worries. Holden.
Yeah, kia ora, thanks for that. Just more kind of a request for Brad, really. Can I just say, though, it's really encouraging to hear you're looking to use local providers for, I gather, transitional work in particular. But I just wondered if you can extend the definition of local providers to include Te Awa Kairangi, Hutt Valley, Wainuiamata as well, because I think that'll pick up a few extras.
Yeah, definitely. So by local providers, we're not limiting ourselves to Wellington City. We're looking to Wellington City and surrounds. So we've gotten one supplier who's expressed interest from Kapiti as well. And so we're open to local suppliers. Yeah.
And Amotai is all Māori providers as well, eh? So that's awesome that you got that hook in too, Tim.
How formal is the evaluation and review process? Once you've actually done a road, what do we get back to see how the the outcome compares to the expectation?
The monitoring and evaluation of the project. Would you like to talk to that, Claire?
Yeah, each of the transitional projects have a monitoring and evaluation plan, and that's a really important part because of this kind of adaptive approach. And so each project outlines what it's going to measure, when and how. And so primarily one of the most important things is bike counts. So every project has a counter installed before so that we can catch numbers. We've got traffic volumes. We're also tracking traffic volumes, traffic speeds, the sort of more perception or qualitative stuff. So as well as the community feedback, there's also perceptions of safety. So we've done a baseline survey to understand how satisfied or how safe people feel with the current layout, and we repeat that survey afterwards. So there's a whole bunch of data that'll come together in a kind of a evaluation report for each of the transitional projects. And I assume that'll be something that comes up to council.
What about the impact on other people, in particular pedestrian safety? And I guess Vida was telling us that the design group have done some work around the Island Bay shops, where, which I think was actually in Paul's presentation as well, about the sort of secondary benefits issue. So do you look at the impact on shopkeepers and whatnot, so you could then go back with the additional packages as you've done with Island Bay, which, by the way, I think is a great idea?
Yep, so we also get market view retail spend data, and that both before and after, and that will be part of that evaluation. It's at an area level. We of course don't get for individual businesses because that's a privacy issue, but we do understand that data. And then Paul's projects also, when we're looking at across, when we go into a project at the beginning, at the scoping stage, we are following the bike network and doing that after those priorities. But when we go, we look at also are there other improvements which are needed. So we look at walking improvements and other things, and then decide if that's a project which we will add into the project or if it's something that we'll do separately.
Yeah, and in terms of project management, we will do lessons learned and really embed those into the whole of the programme, and working groups to improve those kind of processes for learning, because we will be moving from one project to a next, and we don't have those processes in place yet, so that we need to. Yeah.
You report back to us on that stuff, so we get to see the reviews.
The lessons learned.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
It comes through the program board, but the lessons learned across the program. So we've talked about bike counts, safety, perceptions of safety. I mean, the market view data, so this is the retail data that you need, is only 40% of the market, but all of that will be packaged up in a milestone report back to council about how the performance of the program's going. We, alone as a program board level, we're learning a lot. I think I've said this to a number of the councillors. I think Newtown to City, we learn a bunch of stuff that we've just evolved and plugged back into the other projects where some get sprung from. But there will be a point in time where we'll bring all of that data, including the bike counts. Have we made a difference? What are the perceptions? What's the economic impact? That's all going to come back in a council report effectively.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to say, and there'll be a landing point. They'll be factored into the program where we can make those decisions and then plan for the next phase.
Cool. So we've got last question from Tony, and then we're going to have a break, morning tea break.
Thank you. I've got a couple of different sides of questions. In terms of safety, I just wanted to understand a wee bit how the cycling planning deals with mobility parks. In terms of how they are protected and preserved, and also whether or not, I'm thinking in particular of the shared cycleways, proposed along the Hutt Road, whether there's been any consideration of speed limits for cyclists, because they're pretty long, flat sort of things, and it's just, and I've got another question too.
I can quickly answer in terms of the mobility parks. Wherever we go, we follow the parking policy guidelines, and there's some really clear hierarchies around how parking should be distributed when we're going in and doing projects, and we do parking management plans to make sure that we mitigate the effects of that. So mobility parks are very high on, well, basically the highest on our parking, and we also try and go in these projects if we can and improve the mobility parks, because it's not just about creating new ones. We do that where we can, but also the existing ones are sometimes not of the quality that we want to see today, and so we try to improve them as we go through.
Okay. Thank you.
I think just to finish, Tony, as well, I think you had a question about the speed. Yeah. I'm not sure on the actual soccer routes themselves outside of, because those e-bikes can get a pretty cracking pace, but it is a bit of a concern in our shared path areas. So if you're PSA in particular are concerned about some of the speeds along the waterfront, which is a shared path designation, part of the Newtown to City, we've got another little missing piece that we're designating a shared path, but we're currently, there's a couple of examples, really well signposted examples overseas about how you can get cyclists to moderate their speeds, but also scooters as well, so micromobility. So that's a piece of work we're doing on the shared path on the waterfront. But from a cycleways perspective, I don't believe I've never...
No, it's not, and Paul might be able to answer more, but you will have seen probably on Hutt Road outside the creches, Let's Get Wellington Moving has actually been doing some trials of how cyclists can be slowed down through there, and I think we're getting the results soon of that trial to understand how we can, at those points where there's conflicts, can slow them down. But otherwise, the Hutt Road in particular is one area where we're going to see the number of people cycling go up even more, and it is a shared path approach. Anything you want to add?
That's one that's not a shared path. We spent millions separating the paths, so we've now got a footpath so that one doesn't work. So the Hutt Road, the last upgrade we did, we separated out from a shared path, and we now allocate pedestrian space and cycle space. So it's no longer shared. They've each got their own space, but they're at the same level. So speed is still an issue to walk alongside a fast-moving cyclist.
Yeah, I was more thinking of things like bus commuters who have to cross the cycleway, and also people who park on the street have to cross. There's a lot of people who have to cross the cycleway, and but you're saying at the moment there's no speed limit on any cycleways? There's no speed limit.
There's a duty of care.
I know, but there's no speed limit.
There's no speed limit.
Okay.
The corresponding speed limit applies. So in Oriental Parade, for instance, the 40 kilometres an hour on the road applies to the footpath.
So Hutt Road at 60 kilometres an hour?
Effectively, that would be the legal limit, but there's the duty of care that goes with that. Interesting, the connection from Petonia through to Naronga, the Te Awa-Tupa, the cycleway through there is all a 5 metre wide shared path. There's no allocation of space, so that's going to be interesting how that's managed.
There's no speed limit.
100
Yep,
kilometres.
you've got the answer to that. Cool. Do you want to ask your last question, Tony? And then we're going to move on and have a break.
Really, and it's partly related in terms of Let's Get Wellington Moving, I'm just interested that, and I know we're going to get an announcement, Let's Get Wellington Moving, but there's a connection. All these cycleways are coming in to the CBD that Let's Get Wellington Moving is doing, but the CBD piece of work, obviously, if we're going to increase traffic coming in from the east, from the south, when is the CBD piece of work that's going to make it safe to go through the CBD going to be done? And if that's delayed, does that affect the schedule of when your projects go ahead? Because there's no point, providing a great cycleway into an unsafe area. So the CBD piece, I was wondering where that's at. And secondly, in terms of safety and such like Let's Get Wellington Moving, do they use your same hierarchy? Because I just don't quite see the evidence of that, like in the comment around mobility parks.
So we are working really closely with Let's Get Wellington Moving, understanding their program. The Golden Mile, for example, does have bike improvements on it as well, and then the City Streets is doing the cycleways on those other streets as they come through, and the majority of them, I think, are in tranche 1, aren't they? Yeah. In terms of the hierarchy, yes, they do apply both our sustainable transport hierarchy, but also our parking policy applies to all Let's Get Wellington Moving projects.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm sure some more of that will become a bit more clear on Friday as well. Cool. So thank you so much, Hazel. And that is the end of the first part. So we're going to go have a 10-minute morning tea break, and we'll come back at 11 o'clock. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone. Kia ora everyone. All right, so we're going to kick off into I think the fourth and final part of the presentation with Claire.
Kia ora. So I'm Claire Pascoe. I've met most of you by now, but I managed a transitional program, so the rapid rollout. And I thought just before we crack into this section, we printed you out a couple of maps and some information about the next 12 months. So just wanted to see if you had questions about any of that. So this, just to clarify a few things with this map, the things that are already kind of finished or done aren't on this map, and Let's Get Wellington Moving projects. Some of them are. You can see the green, Johnsonville, Nauranga, you mentioned, Tony. This project is out for public consultation, just finished, so that one we put on as well. But this just gives you an idea of the sort of extent of where we are across the city at the moment, which is in a lot of places. So the red, Newtown to the city, Botanic Garden to the city, and the Evans Bay project, they are all under construction. The green, the actual formal public consultation on the traffic resolution. So Ngaio and Aro Valley just closed this week after 3 weeks of engagement. Johnsonville to Nauranga is also closed now, I think. And then we've got the blue areas, which for us is Newtown to Berhampore and Kilburnie connections and Thorndon connections. So these are projects where we're in the earlier phase, and I'll talk a little bit about what the kind of phases look like, but we're out there having conversations with the community, stakeholder groups, people along the route. We've got a baseline survey that's out to try and understand people's experience of the streets as they are at the moment. And Newtown to Berhampore in particular is there we've tried to combine a few projects because there's a lot going on in that area. So there's a parking management plan for Newtown that's being developed, and there's also a Berhampore town centre upgrade. So we're working kind of collectively with those three projects so that the community gets to have more of a kind of combined conversation rather than consulted on each of those independently. In Paul's team to the Brooklyn Hill, so that was a quick build as part of Innovating Streets. That's now moving into a transformational planning space, so figuring out what we'll do for the long term there. Am I missing anything? Oh, Middleton Road as well, so out in the north. That's a project that isn't going to go through a transitional phase because there's it didn't make a lot of sense to try and get any quick wins because of the geography of that area. So Paul's going to go straight into a more transformational planning process on Middleton Road. Paul, do you want to? Oh, so it's the road between Johnsonville and Tawa. And there are the main benefits we're going to get there is when we kind of look to widen the actual corridor. Paul, do you want to pick up here? Anything to add?
The green light's on anyway. I'll expect that. The road's mostly rural in character. We've done as much as we possibly can of eked out as much space as possible. We've narrowed the lanes and created wider shoulders as we possibly could, but it still falls well short of any expectations from the white area plan. So it's really hard for a transitional approach through there. So we're looking to go straight to build. Oh, that came on. Letitia. So the business case, and when we sort of allocated the funding, we've got considerable millions involved to upgrade the Tawa to Johnsonville connection. It also includes a spur that goes up to Churton Park. So we try and do all of that as one business case.
And then, Ray. Oh, do you want to
do it at the end?
Okay.
Is at the end?
I'll just finish this last little bit, which is these handouts. So just to let you know, and we've talked to the ward councillors about this, but there's a few things coming up really in the short term, and Ngaio and Aro Valley are the two that have finished their public consultation on the traffic resolution, and they're coming to the Regs Committee on the 14th of December. So that is going to be the next thing from a decision perspective for that committee. And then not too far behind it is Kilburnie, Thorndon and Newtown to Berhampore. So we are in the space at the moment where we are learning, the design process is iterating, and by sort of March for Kilburnie and Thorndon, we'll be back out in that formal consultation period again, and a little bit later for Newtown to Perranporth. So just wanted to kind of let you know, so if you can see lots of activity in the community and lots of talk about these projects, they are quite live out there at the moment. We can take questions now and then we can carry on.
Oh, cool. So we've got Ray and then Nicola and then Nico. Yep.
Right, I'd like to ask about that Middleton Road road from Johnsonville to Tara again. I ride that quite frequently. In the summertime, I'll probably be on there every day. Now, how are you planning to? What are your ideas on cycling along there? I've actually never felt unsafe along that road.
Look, I desperately tell my team not to focus on solutions. So we're going in with eyes wide open. The bike network plan has identified the need to have a strategic primary cycle route through there. The principles that have been set, we're looking for high quality design, so we need good, safe cycleway through there. We're not sure what that looks like. It's unlikely we're going to be able to get low and slow, but if we could get speeds down to 20 or 30 kilometres an hour, which I'm not suggesting we will, then we may not need to build anything. We could share it. That's at one end of the extreme, right through to big construction, big earthworks to carve out the space. So it'll be something in the gambit. We're going to follow through the business case process, as we're required to do, to find the short list of solutions, and we'll identify the preferred solution from that. So I guess we're trying to give you an assurance that we are following good practice design processes to get the right outcome. So we're putting the right investment in at the right time to get the right outcomes. So cool. without trying to jump to solutions. I mean, I've got things in mind, but I'd rather not suggest what they might be.
Yeah. Okay. From riding along there, I find that the biggest issues for me is that the people driving out of Churton Park and out of those roads along Middleton Road, because I find a lot of them don't look. They just come straight down those roads and straight onto Middleton Road without looking to see what traffic has come along. And it may be that they can't see cyclists, and it may be that they're looking out for cars and trucks and things, but that's what I find the biggest issue there. So I'm very, very cautious when I'm riding, close to one of those intersections.
Cool.
So that's my experience.
Ray. Thank you. Hey, we're just going to actually finish the presentation and then we'll come back to the question list. So we've got 3 people on there, and then so just put your hand up if you want to jump on that, just because we're going to run out of time.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we actually work with our partners in the community, the process we go through. So starting from a partner's perspective, we've been working for the last year through the Let's Get Wellington Moving Mana Whenua Partnership Group, which has been a really good fit for us because that group is talking about transport and street changes. They've been developing that guiding narrative around tupua horonuku, tupua hororangi. And so when our program came along, this was, I guess, another way to bring some of that work, that cultural overlay, I guess, to life throughout the city. And so the approach that they've been kind of helping us understand and flesh out is this concept of whāriki, of a woven mat that overlays the land with panels connected by the threads of the network. So that's almost like a metaphor for the bike network, and it's the concept that we have been working with Mana Whenua artists to kind of bring to life through design, the brand, the placemaking, that kind of thing. So there are, just to give you an example of what that actually kind of looks like in real life. For instance, the awa, but one of the Mana Whenua values from the Let's Get Wellington Moving Partnership Group is about the importance of water. And so on our routes, as we cross an awa, the Mana Whenua artists have been working on a kind of a road marking that helps us bring to life where that awa used to be through the city, which has also a really neat little plate with the name of what that awa will be. So we'll start to see that kind of the historical awa around the city come up to the surface again. And that process is kind of worked through right at the beginning of a project where the sites of significance are identified, and then we kind of talk through with Mana Whenua which of those sites that we can bring to life and how. And so some of the placemaking work you can see here with the planter boxes has pulled that whāriki design into some of the elements that are used in the space. So we're really excited about where this has come to, and there'll be more kind of coverage, I guess, of some of this part of the program over the next month or so when we see it come to life in Newtown. We're also working with our partners at Waka Kotahi, NZTA, who are funding the project, but they're also providing us a lot of technical support. So Waka Kotahi, Let's Get Wellington Moving and MetLink are all part of our technical working group that meets monthly to review our designs, and they go through lots of design reviews. So they review them formally at different stages, and all of the feedback that's coming through that technical working group feeds back to the project manager and gets into the design. So there's quite a fast-paced, iterative design process. That group also has our kind of target user groups on it. So the Walking Pedestrian, Living Streets Aotearoa, Cycle Wellington, and the co-chair of the Accessibility Advisory Group is also on that working group. So that's, I guess, how we work with our partners on the technical design. We then have road safety audits that happen at the 30% and at the 90% design phases, and they're undertaken by independent road safety auditors. And there's a lot of internal reviews, which Brad will tell you about because his team's involved with a lot of those. So there aren't that many options for the transitional program. We're not moving curbs. There's actually not that much technically that we can do, so we leave it to that group to help us to refine quickly a preferred option that we then take out to the community for consultation. So working in parallel to that design process is the engagement process, which feeds in along the way, and that has those 4 phases, which you can see is how we've kind of illustrated the map. So things like Kilburnie Thorndon, they're in discovery at the moment. We'd like to make it really clear to the community what the purpose of that engagement is. It's really to understand their experience on the street and to, for instance, with businesses, understand their loading requirements, their operating hours. We find out from people, things that are working and not working. But then the actual formal consultation, that's the one where we meet our Section 82 of the Local Government Act, of which is really worth reading, all the principles of that section. That's the have your say. So that's the formal period, and we collate the responses to that, take that feedback, propose some amendments, and bring it to, it says the council, it's the regulatory committee this time round. So after that, that's the decision to install, and we go away, we communicate to the community, we let them know what's coming. By this stage, we've got a big, long newsletter database. So all through the discovery phase, we're collecting the stakeholders along the way, and they get put on a newsletter list, so that grows and grows and grows. So by the time we get to installation, we've got a big, long list of stakeholders to tell about how construction's going to happen. And then the neat thing about the transitional approach is then we open up for feedback again, and that's where people actually get to say how they've found it in real life. So beforehand we hear what they think about it when it's just a plan, but once they've experienced it, they have another opportunity to tell us how it's actually working for them. And we've even just seen in that little experience on Ridderford Street how valuable that can be. So our design had a particular setup to the Main Street intersection, and we heard loud and clear when we put that in that we hadn't got it right. And so I think by the end of this week, I don't know if Stephen's still here, that has been redesigned, and because we're using those adaptable materials, we can have another crack at that design. And so I think from an engagement perspective, it's very satisfying to the community, I think, when they can see something they've said turn into action within months rather than years. And that's something that this program has to offer, is that we can move quickly and actually take action on what we've heard. So that's just how the kind of design process and the engagement process tracks alongside. Also, we work with our behaviour change team who are delivering initiatives that aren't infrastructure, or they might be off-street infrastructure, like they work with the scooter companies, they're working on things like business support, so how we can help businesses encourage their staff to look at new ways to travel to work. They work with the Greater Wellington who do cycle skills training all around the city. the region, actually. They look at bike security, they have a mobile mechanic space, bike space. So all of these initiatives kind of are being woven into the infrastructure to really maximise the benefits. And then there's how we work with you. So this is just a summary, and you have these slides of how we have sort of planned to keep you informed. You're the ones often out in the coalface having all these conversations, and it's really important that you have the information that you need. You'll also be bringing lots of information to us. So we've set up a Microsoft Teams channel for each project that has the ward councillors in it, and that's where we update you on when we're out in the community, what communication we've sent. When we post a letter, we put it in that folder, so you've got access to that. But of course, through elected member support, something with an A, you can ask questions at any time, and that just comes through MSA to us. We'll respond as quickly as we can. But yeah, that two-way communication channel with you is really critical, and yeah, feel free, please use it as much as you want to. So we talked before about lessons learned, and I guess for us, lessons learned isn't it's not a checkbox thing where we do an exercise and we file a folder of lessons learned. It's very real for our program to learn and get better. We are moving at a pace which means that we won't get everything right, but it's really important that if we don't get something right, we quickly figure out what went wrong and don't do it again as best we can. So these are just some examples of things that we have been kind of learning and reflecting on over the last year. The first one actually comes from a review a few years ago about Island Bay, and that was that it was really hard for the community to understand one piece of a puzzle, and without that city-wide view, it's really hard to have good conversations about a little section that seems really disconnected. So when you approved the Bike Network Plan in March, that was a huge step forward to be able to help the community understand how this piece of the puzzle fits into a much wider and fully connected. And we refer to that bike network all the time so that they don't think it's just them that has this happening in the area. I mean, there was a lot of kind of operational communications things that we've learned along the way. Options considerations really important. So it's really important for the community that they understand what options we considered and how we assessed the options. So that work that can be kind of back office stuff, we've really tried to bring forward more clearly in our communication so that people can see we've looked at these things and here's how we came to this decision. So it's kind of more of a show your working approach. And similarly with feedback, it's really important to the community that they see how we have taken on what they've said and incorporated that. And again, that was often back office stuff, but we need to talk about that more, and we need to say, because of your feedback, we have X, Y, Z, and we've tried to make that much more explicit as well. There's more here. The consultation fatigue is real. So you will hear two ends of the spectrum. You will hear, I've never been consulted, and you'll hear, I'm consulted way too much. And so we are at least trying to take a sensible approach to consultation and group things where we can and have combined approaches. Ollie, who is the kind of mastermind of all of that planning, does a really great job of keeping the public at the front of his mind. And then the only other thing I'd say is that we've learned a lot about how we work with those really loud, vocal, oppositional voices that can soak up a lot of the team resource and can be, to be honest, at times a health and safety issue that we need to manage for the team. So it's been good learning in that space, and we've got some new processes that we've set up to manage that while continuing to be transparent and provide as much information as we can. We're just keeping everybody kind of psychologically safe. Yeah, and then this is, I guess, the little final, the pep talk part, which you've all had from me many, many times. But this is really hard work. I think from a city council perspective, it's one of the hardest things that you have to do, because while everybody usually agrees at a strategic level it's the right thing to do, the actual bit of doing it gets very, very hard, and it challenges privileges of road space that have been around for decades, and that been a right for people to have the use of public space for a long time, and that is so it's really controversial work. We've got you, all the new councillors, we've bought a copy of The Street Fight, which we handed out a few years ago. It's worth a read because you realise you're not alone. Most cities who decide to go on a journey like this experience what you're going through, but you'll also see that it's worth it at the end, and that's the main thing, I guess, to keep in mind, and we'll work our hardest to make it worth it for you at the end. Our focus is about making it easy for that big silent majority who don't maybe traditionally engage with council. We do obviously work a lot with the vocal minority, and we work also with the real supporters out there, but our focus is the middle. That's what the comms and engagement team are really kind of focused on, and just making it easy for them to participate. So newsletters, emails, in-person meetings, we take phone calls 24/7. We're always available to try and get the feedback from the public. We showed this one last year as well. I think we've had times in the pit of despair, to be honest. Earlier in the year, that little red thing probably tracked down a bit. But yeah, for anything of this scale and this magnitude and this impact, this graph, I think, really is true. And we're going to be at various stages of it over the next few years. I think even with Ridderford Street, there's noise and opposition, but there's also real celebration just for that 400 metres that's in. So the more we get connected through, the more we'll actually hear that part of it as well. And this is super cheesy, but I think if there's anything I've learned... the thing I've learnt the most over the last 15 years is this gets put in a technical basket, and because it comes from engineering, people think transport is a technical challenge, and we're often in conversations that are very technical in nature. It is not, the technical bit's not that hard, and we've got trained and qualified professionals who help lead the technical work. It's the leadership side of things that is the challenge in this space, of which you guys lead the charge on. And I think even in the last year, the bike network plan, the long-term amendment, I think we can feel the impacts of that leadership out in the community in those conversations. People have shifted from fighting, having this kind of cultural war of us and them, to understanding, oh, this is a thing our city has to do. We're really not happy about this car park going, but we kind of get it. And I think that's the impact of the leadership that we feel. And yeah, just want to celebrate your role in that. And yeah, this bike network, City of Impact, Mayor, we've been hearing that message from you. And this is just a part of that, but it is a decent part. And I think if we do it right, it'll be it will have an impact for the city over the next kind of decade or two. So yeah, that's my pep talk. That's everything.
Very inspiring and very proud of the mahi and the way that you guys have been doing it. Okay, so we are at 11:30, but we've got a few questions, so let's make them quick questions, and we're going to draw a line at 11:40, 10 more minutes, is that all right? Yeah, that's all right. But don't forget that you can reach out to the team and have a one-on-one session with them if you need some more information. So we'll go Nico, Tony, and then Sarah.
Sweet, thank you for that. Just curious about the couple of breaks in the red tracks reference Mount Victoria to Newtown, and then the Haitatai eastern side.
Yeah, sorry. So that little red line, Newtown to the city, should have a little whip around the Basin Reserve. So it's just that it follows the street network, and that's not included. But yeah, it goes through the basin. And then Evans Bay, there are bits of Evans Bay that are finished, so they're not on the map. The red is the to be completed sections.
Yep, sweet, happy, thank you.
Cool. And Tony?
Yes, this is a couple. One question is the green paint on current cycleways is not being maintained. Is that any particular reason? Is that part of making sure that the network is integrity?
Yeah, the green paint does as part of our maintenance schedule, so it does get maintained. If Brad was here, he could give us a more detail. But if there's a particular section you're noticing, let us know and we can chase up that bit. But it is part of our regular maintenance.
And one other point, it's great that that Mana Whenua are being consulted. how is it that, is there a mechanism, or are we told what they say in terms of the consultation on specific projects, just so that we can get their input and understanding what they're saying?
Yeah, it's not so much consultation with Mana Whenua, it's more a partnership work. So the work we're doing at the moment is about identifying sites with them, and absolutely we can bring that to life through our council reports, and when we come to you for decisions, we can weave that into the council reports.
And I suspect you'll hear that perspective too from our Pauiwi representatives, Holden and Liz as well, because that's their job, is to bring the Mana Whenua perspective.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to say when you're consulting on specific projects, if there's things of particular note on, let's say, Aro Valley Cycleway, it'd be nice to know what the Mana Whenua commentary was. Thank you.
Cool. And I'm going to go to Nuruddin because you haven't asked the question yet, and then we'll go Sarah and then we're done. Cool. Just check your mic on.
It's not a question, and it's a good thing to see these things going on, and the community that divided around that is now getting more understanding and united. And a good example is what you guys doing in Berhampur Village, and just doing that space more interesting is good. The only thing that I want to suggest is giving a clear indication to the community when this is happening. Example, you said the consultation, the discovery, and when you do these things from 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, but when is that exactly for the community? They want to know, is that happening in January and that's happening in March? So they can prepare accordingly. Some of them obviously losing car parks on the street. So I think it's good to communicate that, improving. Yep.
Cool. And lastly, Sarah, quick question.
Yes, mine was a little bit about the discovery phase too, and I see, Kabuni, Thorndon, Berhampur all in discovery. How open are the questions that you ask and the information that you seek in that discovery phase, and how do you choose who you're trying to discover from?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because we're actually working on that at the moment. And what's important to us is that we're genuine about what the purpose of that phase is. And so we try and make it clear what's out of scope here is routes, the discussion about which routes, because that has been decided through the bike network plan. And I think we're getting better at these conversations. So the Kilburnie one that's just being designed at the moment is about spending some time outlining this process and what's able to be influenced and what's not. And then what we're proposing to do at the moment is basically have big maps of the area and to focus the discussion on people's experience at the moment. So we don't want to get into technical design space, because it's not a good fit. We need our technical experts to lead that. But this is about understanding people's experience of their local area, and I guess recognising that this is their place, and so hearing from them, that how their experience of it, not necessarily their design solutions.
Quick one.
Yeah, quick one, just because if we're going to talk about Kilburnie, which I know well, obviously there's a lot of schools. It would be, how are you going to engage the schools? There are at least 5.
Yep. So we have someone dedicated in our team, Alex, who leads our school engagement. So he's met with, I want to say all of them, all 5. And he's also working with Justin in our behaviour change team, who does all the school travel. So they work together to build off a relationship that might already be there, or to start a new one and have that conversation. So Rongotai, Ebis, so there's someone dedicated to that work.
Cool. I guess also they're not the only stakeholders, so how are you going to just make sure that everyday people can have their say?
So there's kind of a stakeholder mapping exercise that starts at the beginning of each process, where we think about the people directly affected on the route, the groups that are interested in the area. So we look back through previous consultations and understand who has interests here. And then there are other, for Kilburnie, for instance, there's been meetings with the police, Pack and Save, some of the business district, I think the community group who's working out on the Lyell Bay area. So basically the team go through a big stakeholder mapping exercise, and they understand who's been interested in the past. We also have, for Kilburnie in particular, because there's all that work that's been done in the past, we have that whole database of people that we've picked up and put back on. Not everybody wants to engage with the council, so it's trying to get to the people who want to. In Kilburnie, we have a history there, so we're picking up from that list that we started on, and they've all gone on to the newsletter. I'm looking for Ollie to nod at me. Yeah. But yeah, we just, there's also kind of the using, when we come to a phase, our social media team look for all of the community-based groups in Kilburnie and try and post that stuff onto those community pages. But as much as you also want to share and promote that through your networks, we're not fussy really about how we get it out there.
Just ask one more. Yeah, no, just one more because it's a
Yeah,
point
we're
of
running right
clarification.
over time now, Sarah, so...
I
Actually, I'm going to say no more
All right,
questions.
okay, I'll ask you after the...
Yeah, you can always ask after, or take up the offer of the one-on-one. Sounds like that would be really interesting for you. So I just want to say a really big thanks to Claire, Vida, Hazel, Paul, and Joe and Co at the back. Is there any final things about like maybe next steps when we might hear from your team next, maybe at the 8th of December EIC committee?
No, so the next one is this working? Yes, I think it is the Regs Committee, where the 2 traffic resolutions are coming. Cool. On the 8th of December, we're coming with a paper around e-bike share scheme. Cool. And I think that is, looking around the room, I think that there's also the Island Bay traffic resolution coming on the 14th of December as well.
Awesome. So it sounds like there's a lot of opportunities coming up, so make sure you make it along to that 14th of December regs, and you all have to come to the 8th of December EIC. So yeah, thank you so much, team, and thanks everyone for your constructive discussion today. And I think, so we can finish that all now, and I think Deputy Mayor Foon's just going to give us a little announcement just for councillors, but yeah, thank